Mike, the man, the myth, the legend that you are, thank you so much for being here with us
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. Thanks
Fun
for
stuff.
thanks for having me.
Yes, you bet. And thank you for all of you who bared with us. If you've been on for like 5 minutes or so, I was laughing because I love that we have music on beforehand. But we did have a Netflix ad for Sofia Vergara's new movie. It was kind of funny. Yes, but welcome everybody. And I am very proud to introduce Mike Magno. Mike, before we dive into this, if somebody is on the call and they've heard BRRRR, but they don't necessarily know what it stands for, what's it stand for? Why are we here today?
Yeah, so the BRRRR, as it's called, is a unique investment strategy that people employ to basically recycle money. And it's an acronym that became very popular in the last couple of years after David Green published a book called The BRRRR. And it's basically it's buy, it's rehab, it's rent, refinance, and repeat. So those are the typically the steps you would take when you're employing the BRRRR method on a investment property.
Perfect. And if you guys don't know who David Green is, do you want to tell them
Yeah.
about Bigger Pockets?
Yeah. So David Green, for those of you who don't know David, David is a Keller Williams agent based in San Francisco. He is the host of the Bigger Pockets podcast. They get over like 250,000 downloads an episode. So hopefully one day there for me. But yeah, so David is awesome. I've had the opportunity to meet and talk with David several times. David also is a top 100. He's in Gary Keller's top 100. He has a real estate team in San Francisco that does just buku business. And also he also runs a mortgage company now called the One Brokerage. So
Awesome.
yeah, and David's written several books, so David is really, really awesome. And
And just to
yeah,
shamelessly plug your podcast, speaking of podcasts, for those of you on this call, because
yeah,
Mike is probably not going to brag about himself, I will. He recently started a Financial Freedom Fighters. Is that what it
yes,
is?
hmm
Awesome. So what it's so great about it is sometimes agents, even myself, will turn on Bigger Pockets and it's almost like a level above where I am. And Mike is so good about he has this podcast that talks about investing in the now. Maybe you've just started your portfolio or you have 3 units and you want to get to 10. I think Mike is an amazing asset for that. So if he's not going to plug himself, I will.
well, I appreciate that, Jill. Yes, my my co-host and I, who's a client, he's a client who owns 6 doors, 5 in Cleveland. I had this idea for a long time to do content and do a podcast format for people that want to invest or maybe have one property and it's like, what do I do next? And like you mentioned, I think a lot of the content out there in today's world of Instagram and TikTok is just so far beyond the scope of what people can actually comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
I found it troubling that they've just gotten that kind of, I don't know, loose, I guess, is a way to say. So I wanted to put out content for people that want to start or have just started. And, as a guy myself who, we have 9 properties and Jacob, my co-host, has 6. And then I've done a ton of flips. We can feel like we can relate to like normal investors. So
Yeah, I love it. Well, to get down to brass tacks here,
yeah,
Mike, you went through what BRRRR stands for.
sure.
Let me ask you this, and I have like actually legit wondered this question for quite some time.
Okay.
Is each step necessary?
Yeah, so every step is obviously necessary. Now, the depth at which the steps are can vary a little bit. Obviously, we all are real estate. Maybe most of us are real estate agents on the call today. Buying the property is obviously probably the biggest and most important piece of the puzzle. Because if you don't buy it right, then everything else, the dominoes may not fall into place completely, right? And then the rehab, obviously, that's always a problem as well. Um, I can say firsthand, I've never ever come in on budget on a rehab. It just never happens. Now, I've, I've been able to dial it in to where I'm typically within 10% of my budget. Um, and I've also got enough of a margin baked in there that 10% over. Like for example, on our most recent rehab that we listed for sale in Akron, we were about $4,000 over budget on a $30,000 rehab budget.
Mhm.
So just a
Okay.
little bit over 10%. And I'm not one who takes deals where that would kill us, right? I'm not, the margins, you have to be very, very diligent with your underwriting skills. And those are things that people learn. I've learned over the years that, underwriting is very, very difficult. So those are the two steps that really are the most important.
Okay.
And then, obviously, renting it is important, right? You want to get a quality tenant in your property. I believe in taking your time up front. I often will take 2 or 3 months to place a tenant because I want to make sure I find the right person for us. Um, and I explain this to my clients all the time that want to invest or who are investors. The real killer in the long-term rental game is turnover.
Mhm.
When you have turnover in a unit, it can cost you thousands, right? You got to paint, you got to replace flooring, maybe you need new appliances. Whereas if your tenant stays for 3 or 5 years, I mean, that's just years of cash flow and debt pay down that is really helping, build your wealth exponentially. Our longest tenure tenant right now is at 8 years,
Wow.
and yeah, could we rate, is she paying under market rent by today's standards? She is. However, you have to look at it mathematically. In that property, she pays $750 a month and all utilities. It's a little 2-bedroom home. I could probably get $900 a month for that property today.
Mhm.
However, for me to get the $900 for that property, I would have to I'd have to kick her out, right? She's been living in it for 8 years. All of us who have lived in our homes that long know that houses with 8 years of wear and tear is going to need repairs. So if you look at it from an annual perspective, right, that $150 times 12 months in a year, that's only $1,800. Well, it's going to cost me probably 10 or 12,000 to make an extra 1,800. Is it really worth it? So that's why I'm of the belief of once you get those tenants in there and you can give them a really nice home and make them feel good and they want to stay, keep them in there. So
And Mike, I've learned from you, not to share all your secrets, but
yeah.
I do think quality of tenants is very important to you. And I've noticed you prefer single family over multifamily
Mhm.
because of that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So once again, this is always going to be someone's personal preference. We do own a duplex, and it's performing very, very well for us now. But I like single families because, in my experience, the turnover is not nearly as great as it is in multifamily. Now, the multifamily proponents will say, "Well, yeah, but you've got 2 rents coming in or 3 rents coming in. If you only have a vacant, if you have one vacancy, it's still paying you money." And that's true. That's true. I also subscribe to the fact that if you can't afford a vacant unit for a couple of months, this you might not be in a position where this should be what your focus is on,
Yeah,
right? Because
makes
you are
sense.
running it's running a business, right? We're all of us that are realtors, we're running a real estate sales business. When you have rental properties, you're running a rental property business. When I'm flipping homes, I have a flipping homes business, and they all have operating margins, and you have to control your costs, and vacancy is a cost.
Mhm.
And if you're setting yourself up so that are in good positions, to have a vacancy for a month or two shouldn't be a killer.
Yeah. So let me ask, are you willing, this is a question I had later
Mhm.
on, but I'm going to ask it now,
Okay.
and maybe quality of tenant changes it. Are you willing or okay with losing money for the first year or two if the location and long term makes sense?
So I would personally, that's a tough question. I would look at it from the perspective of at least breaking even.
Hmm.
And because if you're breaking even, you're actually still making money because if you have a tenant, you're getting debt pay down, right? A lot of people forget about that aspect of growing your wealth is that debt pay down and not the interest that you're paying because that's going back to the bank, but the actual principal pay down. Now, I understand at the very beginning We all know mortgages, the interest is front loaded, right? So you're not getting a ton of pay down in year one, but you're still getting debt, you're still getting interest, you're still building equity in year one. So I think I don't know if I would want negative cash flow
Mhm.
unless it was like in an it would have to be in such an area that the appreciation would far outweigh what I'm losing on a monthly basis. But in our market, the types of neighborhoods that I target, the B class and the C plus neighborhoods, I want cash flow.
Mhm.
So like I said, if the deal was right and the property was right and I knew I could keep it for a long time and it's in the area that I'd want to be in, I guess I would consider it if it broke even for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But
Um,
I think that would depend on the investor too, though.
yes. Yes. Okay. That makes sense. You also talked about underwriting in the
Hmm.
beginning. Can you break down? I think a fear I have would be, we've just kind of started this. We have a couple rentals. My biggest fear to actually do the BRRRR and the rehab is, do you have like a foolproof method of how you determine the numbers
Uh,
and how much to give to
right,
rehab?
right.
And like, that's the part that I think scares a lot of people.
Yes.
What light would you shed there?
Yeah. So it's obviously there is in the rehab side of the business, there's not a formula. That's the one area that I can't quantify it in a spreadsheet, right?
Mhm.
Now, I've learned on other projects, I've just kind of learned as I've gone along how much things cost. After doing it 3, 4, 5 times, you figure out, okay, for me to have vinyl flooring installed, it's going to cost me $2 a square foot for material. The three contractors I've used have charged me between $2.50 and $3 a square foot for installation. So now I know when I'm underwriting, I'm going to be somewhere in the $5 a square foot range. Um, you know, what else? Paint. Painters usually use some type of formula for per square foot what they charge for paint. There's a lot of nuance, but I've learned over time, kind of like what, having done it, 6, 7, 8 times a year, what things are going to cost.
Yeah.
So,
Also, Mike, I know you said, I think you guys have 9 properties that you've held and you've done flips too.
mhm.
How do you determine if, hey, this is a rental and I'm holding, or this is something I'm going to flip?
Yeah, so we're in a spot right now where we want to continue gaining traction on the flips because the cost to refinance right now is high, right?
Mhm.
We've all
Mhm.
seen increases in the interest rates that our clients are seeing. So it's much higher cost to borrow, which makes deals much more difficult to actually cash flow. But then also for us, we have a little bit different strategy down the road that we're looking at. So I'm trying to stack the cash from flips as opposed to keeping these rentals for a different project for us. So I'm just at a different spot in my investing.
Okay, that makes sense. And you bring up financing,
Yeah.
you know, it is, rates are high, home prices are high, which
Hmm.
limits your cash flow.
Right.
Where are you finding your deals? Is it still possible to find something on the MLS?
It is. It's obviously much more difficult to buy stuff off the MLS. But I mean, I just closed on a property yesterday that we bought straight off the MLS. It was out there for everyone else to see. Now, I'm very experienced, so I might see things differently than other people. So
Mhm.
I might see an opportunity where other people don't see that opportunity, and I might be able to act on that and close on it faster. Um, but there's several ways for people to get deals. Obviously, just telling people, right? Like, hey, speak it into existence, right? Tell everybody I'm a real estate investor. I'm looking for a deal. That's how a lot of people do it nowadays. You can do that. So obviously that would be something off market, right? If you, if you get a referral from a friend or, you can do it that way. We spend a ton of time in our cars, right? So, driving for dollars is a way that a lot of people get deals. Where you're maybe, you've got an hour before an appointment and you don't have anything to do. Well, go drive a neighborhood. Go pick a neighborhood to drive. Find a neighborhood that's got, you guys all know what a property looks like when it's being not taken care of, right? The grass is tall. Maybe there's 5 newspapers piled up on the porch. Maybe the roof, it's got missing shingles. Maybe it's got really old ratty windows. I mean, everybody knows what a distressed property looks like when they're driving by it. Jot down the address. I mean, look up the property owner on an auditor's website. There are apps out there that'll skip trace for you. If people don't know what skip tracing is, it's where they'll find the phone number and an email for you to try to get a hold of people. So that's one way to get a hold of people to find deals. Direct mail, mailing them a letter. Hey, I am Mike Magno. I'm a local real estate investor. And I would tell you to emphasize that. Like, I'm local. Tell them, hey, I grew up in this neighborhood and I really enjoy buying properties and bringing them back to life. Would you be interested in talking to me about your property? And maybe you find a deal that way. You can get on wholesale lists. If we're having a private conversation, I would have more choice words for many wholesalers that operate in our market. There are a few reputable ones that I'll deal with that kind of do it more above board than others. So that's another way, is to get on some wholesale lists out there. You can hop into, there are several Facebook groups. I mean, if you just hop on Facebook and type in off market Cleveland, you'll have 15 groups pop up that you could jump into. And there's deals to be had there.
That's a great thought.
Yeah. So there's those types of things. And then, as a real estate agent, right, we all go on listing appointments. This past year in 2023, I bought 2 properties where people called me to list it for them. And neither property did I actually have the money to buy them, because I had my money working elsewhere. And the one thing I will tell people is you can find the money. If you find a deal, you can find the money, right? We've all heard Gary Keller tell that. I remember him saying it on stage at Family Reunion or Mega Camp a few years ago, when people were always like, "Oh, I can't find a deal," and Gary's like, "Well, find me a deal, I'll fund it." You know what I mean? So you can find the money. I mean, there's hard money, there's private money, there's your own cash. You can get a HELOC on your personal residence. There's a million ways to do it. So that's another way, is to, both situations that I bought those properties. The one was a tired landlord. I don't even it's funny, to this day, I don't even know how they got my name and number. They just called me one day out of the blue. They called me. They're like, "Hey, we got this property we want to sell. We heard that you're the guy to talk to for investment real estate." It was in Akron. And I said, "Sure. Yeah, absolutely." So I went and saw the property. It was a nice duplex in a good area in Ellet, over on the east side of Akron. And it was just tired. It was tired. The outside, the siding was faded. It was a ranch twinplex. It had 2 decks on it. The decks were falling off of it. The HVAC was ancient. It had the Federal Pacific stab lock, electric panels in it. So I mean, there was a lot of little things that added up to a pretty big renovation, and they just were tired. The property had gone vacant. They didn't want to put new tenants in it, but they had done a really nice job as landlords of maintaining the interior of the units. They just hadn't put a ton of money into the capital improvements that it needed. So
Sure.
I basically gave them 3 options. I said, "Hey guys, based on my research, here's the comps. This is what I think the property will sell for today if we put it on the market. Once you pay the sales commissions, the title charges, this is what you'd walk away with." So that's option A. Option B, I made a list. I said, "You do all of these things to the property that I've outlined. It's going to cost you approximately this, because this is what I would pay for it. This is what it would cost me to come in and do it." And I said, "You'll make more money, but it'll take you a couple more months, and you'll have to deal with contractors. And I don't know where the market's going to be in 2 months, right?" So I gave them that option. And then option C was, I'll just buy it. And I told them, I said, "I will give you the same net proceed that you would get from selling it today as is." I said, "I will buy it with cash." I said, "I will close on it on a date that you choose." And I said, "I will buy it with no inspections." So, I mean, I'm at a point in my career where I'm comfortable walking a property and offering that. I don't recommend that for everyone until you have a good enough construction background to feel confident in offering no inspections. But I was able to get the property. Now I did give them more money than I gave them more than I originally wanted to. Because they kept hemming and hawing about, well, we'd like to get a little bit more for it. So, what if we did? So then they came back to me and they're like, well, what if we did, A, B, and C, but we didn't do, D, E, and F? And I'm like, well, you either should do it all or nothing.
Sure.
Because the buyer's agents out there are going to nitpick you regardless.
Yes.
So anyway, long story short, I ended up buying it from them. The other story this year that we bought from a seller directly was a situation where I actually represented the buyer when he bought the property about 7 years ago. It was when I first got into real estate. He was one of my very first clients. Unfortunately, he fell on hard times. He reached out last summer about selling his property, but it was in pretty bad shape. It was pretty bad shape, and he needed quick and he needed fast. So I ended up just, seeing that opportunity, and we discussed some numbers, and we got to a number that he was comfortable with to walk away, literally just walk away.
That's so
Yeah,
great.
it was sad, but it was also nice to be able to help him, just move on and get behind that chapter of his life. He was being foreclosed on. So that was nice to do that. I even provided him a dumpster before he even moved out. I paid for it. I had a dumpster delivered so that he could help clean out the house and, things like that. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. When you mentioned where you had bought the duplex, that you said Ellet,
Mhm. Mhm.
and earlier I know we talked about, like you said, B, C plus class neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Is that always the class you would buy in? And is there a certain neighborhood class that you think is the best to purchase in when you are using this method?
Yeah, so there's a couple things there. I tend personally to stick in the B and C areas because those are where you're going to get the maximum price to rent ratios, right? To go into an A class suburb, you know, Solon, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to buy a single family home in Solon for less than $400,000, and it's obviously you're not going to rent it for $5,000 a month in cash flow. Like it's just not going to work. So
Sure.
what you need to do is be mindful of that and go to places where people want to live, right? What are some popular Cleveland neighborhoods? Old Brooklyn is one where you could go buy a decent single family home. And the reason I'm thinking of Old Brooklyn is a wholesaler that I do know, that I find to be reputable, actually texted me this afternoon before we got on the call about a property that he just recently got under contract in Old Brooklyn. So that's what made me think of it. You can target some of these neighborhoods where a lot of other investors have invested, right? Like that's one way to learn, like, where should I invest? Well, where are other investors investing? They're picking these neighborhoods that are being gentrified, right? And they're moving into those neighborhoods, right? And then some of the suburban locations too can be good once you've kind of you've built up a network and you've built up a bankroll, and you can go into a Parma, you could go into a South Euclid, you can go into a Cuyahoga Falls, some of these other areas, Copley, the one that we just put up on the market this week, where you can go in and spend a little bit more money and make a little bit more money.
Sure. Um, Let me ask you back to the financing side.
Mm-hmm.
Another fear I think a lot of people have. Oh, and let me ask, Kathleen had a question. Is it
Yeah.
better to pay cash if you have it for a rehab or rental over financing it? What are the pros and cons? And then I
Yeah,
have a,
great question. If you have the cash, use the cash. And the reason I say that is because the cash will have the least amount of holding costs, right? A deal killer for people, especially when you're going to BRRRR, right? When you're going to refinance a property, is the total cost of what you're into the property for. So if you have the cash, my recommendation is always use the cash, because you're not using hard money, you're not borrowing it from a private investor, you're not getting a loan on the property at all, right? So you don't have any interest expenses. Now, you will have other holding costs, right? You're going to need an insurance policy, you're going to need to pay for utilities. There are ways to do that. Now, the downfall of using cash is you have all this cash tied up, right? I have several projects where we have 6 figures of cash tied up in them, and that's very intensive, right? Like you've got all this money poured into a property that you can't tap into, right? It's very illiquid when you own a property like that. So that's the good and the bad. So that's where I think for people learning the process, they have to weigh their risk tolerance, right, to have the cash tied up for that long of a period of time before they can tap back into it on the refinance part of the process. Um, However, if you buy something with hard money, let's say, because we actually have a project right now that we're in the middle of a rehab on, that we have a hard money loan on. Hard money is very expensive. I'm
Mhm.
paying 12.5% interest. I had $5,000 in loan costs, so it can be very, very expensive to borrow that money. So that's why speed is also very crucial, right? Those types of projects, when you have loans on them or you're borrowing the money, you need to get through them as fast as you can. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of your profit or a lot of your equity, eaten alive by interest expenses.
That's where having good contractors that are going to get
Yep,
it done.
contractors, anything in all the whole process, right? You have to have that dialed in if you're going to go that route. And that's
Mhm.
why for so long we stuck to cash, because we didn't want to extend ourselves into situations where we were going to have these huge interest expenses. So it's only in the last 6 months to 9 months for us, that we've taken on more risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, on the financing side, how, with rates being high as they
Mhm.
are people having a more difficult time when it comes to refinancing? They've made the renovations and now is it tougher to get refied?
Yes. So it's a multifaceted question. So for those of you who don't know, there are seasoning requirements typically for a refinance, especially a cash out refinance. So what's a cash out refinance? A cash out refinance is when you own a property free and clear and you want to tap into the equity and cash out of it, right? So back in, what was it, March of last year, Fannie and Freddie changed the guidelines on the conventional lending side. You have to now own a property for 12 months before you can do a cash out refinance. So obviously that's going to tie you up for a much longer period of time, and it's very hard to determine whether or not where the market's going to be in 12 months, right? Um, so that makes it extremely difficult. So that's why you've seen a lot of people start going into other non-QM loan products. Everybody who doesn't know, it's non-QM is non-qualifying mortgage. That means you as the borrower are not qualifying for the mortgage. The asset itself is what's going to qualify you. It's basically, the analogy I like to use is it's commercial financing for residential real estate, right? For a single family or a 2, 3, or 4 unit property, you're using another term that they use. It's called DSCR, or debt service coverage ratio loans. Um, Now, the nice thing with the debt service coverage ratio loans is you can refinance those typically much faster. I have lender contacts here locally. They have 3 month seasoning periods. They have 6 month seasoning periods. They offer hard money as well, where you can do what's called a rate and term refinance. So there are other options out there for financing. It is much more expensive, though. You have to understand, when you're looking at loan costs, to do a cash out refinance, it's the most expensive loan you can get. We actually just finished a BRRRR. I did it out of order. We refinanced it before we rented it, so I'm still seeking a tenant, but we went ahead and refinanced out of it. I wanted to get the refinance done in 2023, and we were able to refinance out all of our money out of the deal, but the interest rate is 9%. So
Wow.
yeah, but at the end of the day, if you're able to refinance out all of your equity, then your return is infinite.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Sure.
Is there, this might not apply with BRRRR essentially, but I will hear investors sometimes talk about, oh, I can't, the limit to finance is
Hmm.
10.
Yep.
Or is there a finance limit to how many rental properties you can finance through traditional financing?
Yes. So I'm obviously, guys, I'm not a lender. I'm not a loan officer, but there are some restrictions. There are Fannie and Freddie guidelines that will restrict you. I know when you get to 4 mortgages, there's more hoops you have to jump through on the conventional side, and then when you get to 10, they basically will shut you off. But there's alternatives at that point. If you've scaled your
Sure.
business beyond that, There are plenty of alternatives out there. I mentioned the non-QM, the DSCR type loan products. Also, local banks, right? You could do a cross collateralization refinance of 6 properties. You could go to a local bank here. Who's a good local bank that does S&T Bank is a bank that I've used many times. They have great loan products on their commercial banking side. You could take 6, let's say you had 6 conventional mortgages and you wanted to get more, but you were tapped out because your debt to income ratio was too high. You could go to them. They could refinance all 6 properties together into one loan. It would be a commercial loan. It would be out of your personal name. It would pay off all the mortgages off of your credit report. And then you could restart the process again, getting conventional loans if you wanted.
Okay.
Now, the problem with commercial loans, and I don't want to go down this too much with everyone, commercial loans have different types of terms. It's typically an adjustable rate mortgage where you're only going to get a 5-year or 7-year fixed term, and then it's going to adjust. And then typically the amortization period for commercial loans, you don't get 30-year financing. It's typically 25 or 20-year financing. And that will depend on the loan to value of that portfolio that you're refinancing. But yeah, anyway.
Okay. That makes sense. And if you need a lender, there is one on the call. Chris Bullock, drop your info in the chat.
Yeah, and Chris offers conventional loans and now offers DSCR loans. So Chris would be a great contact to talk to about doing those types of loans for anybody on the call.
Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah,
Mike, we
absolutely.
had another question in the
Yes,
chat. Is it good
please.
to select an area up and coming and try and buy and hold multiple properties?
So I think so. For people that are in this for the long haul, I definitely think it would behoove you to like pick areas. What I like to call is in the path of progress, right? So maybe it's outside of the neighborhood where you've seen a ton of influx. There's pockets all over Cleveland like that, right? I mentioned old Brooklyn earlier. Well, people are starting to now, Clark Fulton is becoming popular and has been popular because of the prices. But still, Clark Fulton, you drive through Clark Fulton and it's like, okay, well, that block looks great. And then you drive one block and you're like, oh man, what happened? Where'd the neighborhood go? Right. So you got to be very, very careful with where you pick. And then also, we're all agents. We understand how the appraisal process works when we refinance properties and the parameters at which the appraisers use. So I would always just tell you to trust your numbers and don't try to push the values too much. That way you don't end up, leaving a ton of equity in a deal. Because you potentially could, if your appraisal comes up short, you might have to leave some equity into a deal.
Sure.
So.
Okay.
But yeah, like us, our portfolio is concentrated in one neighborhood in Akron.
What's the advantage of concentrating your portfolio to one specific neighborhood?
So for us, it's management. We currently manage our portfolio ourselves, still, and that saves us money because it's saving us 10% in management fees. Now that's something that you don't have to not hire a manager. If you don't want to deal with placing tenants, we all know those tenant calls, right? Like we all know they can be annoying. If you don't want to deal with it, hire a manager. Hire a manager. There's plenty of them out there that would manage your property for you. You're going to pay them 10% of your gross rent. So just understand that you're going to limit your cash flow a little bit, but if it might be worth it to you,
Sure.
maybe you want this to be as passive as you can, then, obviously hiring a manager would be good. So, but yeah, for us, concentrating in one neighborhood is, for the management aspect of it. And then you get to know people too, right? Like, for example, we talked about this earlier where you asked me about getting good deals. I recently bought a property where the listing agent knows that we buy in Firestone. It's in Firestone Park. We buy in Firestone Park. And I had an agent reach out to me who knows me personally, and she knows I love Firestone Park, and she knows we buy in Firestone Park. She had a property coming on the market. This was last summer. And she reached out to me and she said, hey, I'm going to have this property coming on the market on Saturday. It was like a Wednesday. She goes, I know you love the park. It needs a heavy rehab, so should be up your alley. I said, great, send me some details. She sent me some details. The numbers on the surface didn't work for me, and I told her that. I said, hey, I really appreciate you reaching out. I said, but I just don't foresee a scenario based on the photographs you gave me and what they want where this is going to work for me. And she said, oh no, please send me an offer anyway. She goes, this will give me ammunition to kind of beat them up, because she told me straight up she did not recommend that list price. She went with what they wanted, but she needed some ammunition to go back to them with less. And that's a relationship that I've built, right? I paid a little bit more for it than I wanted to, but it was still a good deal. But I ended up buying the property. And that, like I said, and once again, where I won out over everyone else was I waived inspections, which once again, you have to get to a point in your life and you're comfortable doing that. I don't recommend it for everyone. I don't recommend it if you're just getting started, but I've done this enough and I have enough construction background. Now, what you could do is we all have property inspectors that we like to use. Maybe you hit up your property inspector and buy him lunch, and you give him $100 and you tell him, hey, will you go walk this property with me? Will you give me a 30-minute inspection of this property, a visual inspection? Like, that'd be something to do.
I
I have
love
such
that idea.
a good relationship with my property inspector. I mean, he walks properties with me for free because I send him a ton of business, but
Sure.
he'll walk a property with me if I ask him. If I'm a little weary on something,
Mhm.
if I want a second opinion, he'll go walk a property with me, no problem.
That's great.
So,
We have another really good question in the
okay.
chat.
Okay.
Is it a good idea to go in on a flip with a partner? What are the pros and cons? This person says they know someone that has cash. My husband and I will do all the work.
Okay.
What return should I give back using the cash?
Okay. That's a great question. That's how I got started. That's how I got started. I got started with no money, and I found a partner, and we split the profits 50-50. That's what we did. They put up all the cash, and I brought all the sweat and equity and that, and then I split the profits with them. That's the way I did it. That's a pretty normal equity split in that world when you're doing all the work and they're putting up all the money. 50-50. I know it seems like a lot because it is a lot of equity to give up. If you're making $25,000 in net profit on a property and you're giving that investor 12,500, boy, that seems like a lot. But that being said, you're learning a lot too. Remember that there's a cost to the education of learning how to rehab homes. And if that costs you 50% equity for 2, 3, 4 deals so that you learn, I think it's an invaluable lesson.
That's
So
huge. Thank you.
now when you get a reputation, you can then push back and dictate terms, right? So like we have several people that have reached out to us about investing with us, right? As a private money investor, right? And that enables me to dictate terms to them because they want to give me money, right? And we're very generous with our terms. We offer 12% interest. That's a chunk of change. But yeah, I mean, where else is someone going to get 12% interest to do nothing but wire money?
Yeah.
Right. So that's where, you have to build to that, obviously. But yeah, I think a 50-50 equity split, if they're putting up all the cash and you're doing all the work, that's more than fair.
That's great. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Um, I have a couple reno questions, and then
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, what is the timeline? What's your timeline goal? It sounds like you are much more on the mindset of you would rather get the right tenant, but is there an ideal timeline goal from purchase renovations have been made to getting a renter in there?
I think if you can do the entire process in 6 months or less, you've hit a home run. As somebody who's done this many times, and I don't think I've ever done it in under 6 months,
Mhm.
I think that would be a huge home run. Now, for example, the property that we just BRRRR'd, we originally did not buy that property to keep it, and things change, and you always have to have multiple exit strategies on things as well. So that property, we've owned it for well over a year, actually. But that being said, I think in the perfect world, if you sat down and you walk through the timeline, right? So you get a property under contract, you're going to have anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks for closing, right? And if you're really good at it, you'll have your contracting crew starting within the first week or two, you hope,
Mhm.
you know. And then from there, you would hope the construction would be anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks, right? So that puts you basically at 3 months. It's going to take you probably about a month to do the refinance. And then it's going to take you probably 6 to 8 weeks to find a tenant. Or if you did it in reverse, you find the tenant is really the way you should truly do it, is find your tenant first and then refinance it.
Okay.
Once you have a tenant in there that's paying, um, because you want that income coming in,
Yeah.
you know.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had another question in the
Sure.
chat. What features do you find add the most value to quick flips?
So flips, I mean, kitchens, bathrooms, and HVAC are the things I typically concentrate on in the flips. You make a nice kitchen, you make a nice bathroom, you give people updated the expensive stuff that typically goes a long way, and you can get away with maybe some cheaper features, cheaper flooring, cheaper lights, basic paint. It also depends on the level of property that you're rehabbing as to where you're going to be with some of your finishes. So, like for example, in a rental property, in our rentals, I always make our kitchens and bathrooms bulletproof, because what is the thing that's going to cause the most damage to your property besides a tenant? It's water, right? We all know that.
Mhm.
Leaky roof, leaky faucets, leaky toilet, leaky sink, whatever, bad grading, water getting in your basement or your foundation. So I always try to make sure that my bathrooms and kitchens are bulletproof, because I don't want those issues later. Now for me, what I do in our rentals, I mean, we do, instead of granite, I do a nice laminate countertop. Like, you don't need to do granite, especially in a C-class neighborhood. I do white appliances instead of stainless steel, right? The white are typically, $300-400 cheaper for a set than stainless steel. It's all the same. Like, it all works the same. It all, so why spend the extra cash? Because you're not going to, the appraiser's not giving you more money in your appraisal because you put stainless steel versus white appliances. If they're new, they're
That's
new.
such a good point. Would
So,
there ever be a circumstance that you wouldn't put appliances in and the tenant
so
brings
I,
their own, or no?
yeah. For all the agents on the call, we've all seen this, right? The flipper who runs out of money because they put no appliances in a property, right? They
Yes.
they don't even they have a hole for the dishwasher, but they don't even put a dishwasher in there. Like, that to me that's egregious. Personally, I would lose money on a deal and put appliances in a property before I sold a property without appliances. And the
Okay.
reason being, especially for us, a lot of our flips are lower priced properties, right? Um,
Mhm.
it's part of my why. I want to make affordable housing for people, and putting out a nice property in Akron for $125,000 that's completely turnkey for someone, including appliances, is just the way I operate my business. And if you screwed up that bad that you can't afford to put $1,800 worth of appliances in a rehab, then that's on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, the chat is blowing up with questions, Mike,
All
so
right.
I'm just going to keep them
Yeah.
going. And thank you guys for being
Sure.
plugged in here.
Yeah.
The $1 million question, how do you
Yeah.
find honest, semi-inexpensive contractors that actually show up?
So this is the most difficult piece of any puzzle of any type of rehab. I will be honest. I've just cultivated relationships with guys, and I've met guys through different ways. Um, I found one guy on Facebook. I took a flyer on a guy I met through Facebook. Another guy was referred to me by someone else who wouldn't take on my job, and
Mhm.
then I've used him for probably 10 rehabs at this point. Um, I know there's other agents that will tell you to go hang out at Home Depot. Go in early in the morning, 6 to 9 a.m. when the contractors are all at Home Depot, and you can find contractors that way. I've personally not seen a ton of that in our area, but it's the whole reticular activating thing, right? Like, when people say, well, you have a red car, you'll see red cars. So when we were in Florida, when we were in Florida over Christmas at our house in Florida, I had to go to Home Depot for something. One of our lights broke on the outside of our house, so I had to go to Home Depot to get one to replace it. And I pulled into Home Depot, and there was like 15 contractors just kind of staying in there hanging out. The Home Depot in Florida by our house has like a like a hot dog stand in the parking lot, and all these guys are just standing there chilling. So it does happen. It does happen.
So funny.
Yeah, you can find people, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of networking. I would tell everyone, I would tell everyone to email their database, right? Like you have a database of what, 200, 300, 400, 3,000 people. Send out an email this week to your database, telling them that you're updating your
Board
list of,
vendors.
yeah, your core vendor list, and ask people, who do you know that does paint, flooring, and bathroom renovations that I can add to my list? And you'll get, I bet you get responses,
Yeah, that's
because
great.
people love referring people that they know, like, and trust, right? Like we're all in
Mhm.
that business. A lot of these groups for your Facebook groups for the city that you live in, right? Down where we live in Medina, we're in a Medina group, right? Like anytime anybody asks for a contractor, 14 people pop up in these things. Now, you do have to understand that some contractors do what I call retail work, right? Where they're working with homeowners. And that's going to be more expensive than guys that do rehab for investors. So that's a distinction that you have to make.
That's
You
a
know,
great point.
there's a lot of contractors out there that won't do like investor work because it's cheaper work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Do you think having a boiler system versus a furnace in a property causes an issue in finding a tenant or selling?
So personally, I stay away from boilers. I do not own a property with a boiler. And why don't I own a property with a boiler? One, my buy box is very narrow. So that's something else that people need to understand when they're wanting to get into real estate investing. You need to come up with your own buy box. My buy box is always 1940 or newer. And typically, once you get past 1940, these houses don't have boilers in them anymore.
Hmm.
So boilers, I don't do boilers typically. I would, I would never say never. The right deal comes along and it's got a boiler. Boy, I'd probably think long and hard about it. But the other reason I don't like boilers is now you don't have any ductwork and you don't have central air conditioning, right? And then
Yeah.
on top of it, boilers are super expensive. Has anybody replaced a boiler recently? Because if you haven't, man, they're expensive. I have a client who had to replace a boiler in a 4-unit apartment building, a very small 4-unit apartment building. Like we're talking 1-bedroom apartments that were like 600 square feet. So, I mean, the entire building was only like 2,500 square feet. The boiler was like $14,000.
Yes.
I can get so I just replaced a furnace and an air conditioning in a property I'm rehabbing for $6,000.
Wow.
Now, I'm not putting in fancy, right?
Mm.
And I have a good relationship with this HVAC contractor. This guy, he's not, it's not going to be that cheap for somebody else, right? This guy probably does 6 to 8 installs for me per year. So
Sure.
I'm getting a volume discount there. So, but yeah, I would much prefer forced air furnace so that you can have central air. And if the property doesn't have central air, it'll be much easier to add central air. Because if you have a boiler, then you're talking about mini splits and window units and wall units, and that just gets very expensive.
Yeah.
I try to make it a very streamlined process.
What are your thoughts on sheriff sales or auction sites, purchasing the house sight unseen?
So once again, not for the faint of heart, right? So yeah, the sheriff's auctions. I have never bought one from a sheriff's auction. I have bid on sheriff's auctions, but I've never been the winning bidder. I will also say that any of the sheriff's auctions that I've personally bid on, I physically got into the house. Now, for those of you who don't know, that's trespassing. So I'm not encouraging you to trespass, but you'd be surprised on properties that are being auctioned off at the sheriff's auction. You walk up to the door and just turn the doorknob, and the door is open.
I
Right.
hope you're not listening, Dennis Bergansky.
So, but yeah, so any property I've ever been on a sheriff's auction, I have physically seen, because I want to see the foundation.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
foundation is the one thing that will absolutely kill you. Um, I have a friend who bought two properties on sheriff's auction, and unfortunately had two properties where he did not see the foundations, and he had two properties where he had to do like $30,000 in foundation repairs on both.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
Mike,
now,
sorry, go ahead.
and then the other thing too, though, there are plenty of auction sites out there that you can that have broker access to, right? Like for example, we literally just closed on a property yesterday in Akron that was listed on the MLS with an REO broker, but it was being run by Xome, XOME.com.
Mm,
So I didn't actually talk to the listing broker. He only had it listed for exposure. Everything was being done through Xome. So I actually bid on the property on Xome, and I was able to access the property because the broker had a lockbox on it and you were able to get access to the property. So,
okay.
and in that instance, obviously I was able to walk the property.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I've had some clients, Hubzu was a good site.
Hubzu's another one out there. Auction.com's another one out there. Um, Once again, I think for inexperienced investors, that's probably not the best option for
Sure.
you. I'm trying
Absolutely.
to, I want people to mitigate their risks.
Yes, that's a great point. Speaking of mitigating risks, is there a resource somewhere that offers info? And this would be to supply to your clients that are investors or for you
Mhm.
yourself if you're looking to invest. Is there a resource somewhere that offers info to upgrade properties for higher appraisal or to give some type of idea of what raises the value?
Oh boy, that's tough to say. I mean, there's plenty of books and stuff out there. You know, Bigger Pockets is a huge resource. Their bookstore online. I mean, there's all kinds of books out there on rehab. Um, you know, we're all agents, or most of us are agents on here. We all have access to the MLS. We all see what stuff is selling for. Um, go tour properties. Be proactive. Go look at a property, go to an open house, go to a broker's open where a house has been rehabbed, and then make sure to make notes of what that property sold for later, right?
Yeah,
Um, you need to educate yourself on those things as well. Um, in our market, it's tougher because I think that the margins are just much thinner here. So I don't really have a good, you know, I don't think I have anything good in that regard. I apologize. I don't. You guys kind of stumped me on that one. But yeah, there's a lot of books out there about like estimating rehab and things like that. So
mhm. I've seen, I don't know if it's from Pillar to Post or a title company, but something was floating around for a while. I feel like it was pre-COVID though. I feel that post-COVID, people have been very traditional. They don't like to give quotes because who knows if the cost of materials have tripled or since you left.
yeah,
Yeah,
materials they have really settled finally.
yeah,
But
good.
yeah, I mean there's yes, I think Pillar to Post offers a little pamphlet that they give
Mhm.
out for home inspections on like what things cost when it comes to rehab, but it's a range, right? But yes, it is very difficult, right? The cost of materials for a long time, especially during the COVID years. I mean, one day a 2x4 would be $6, the next day it'd be 12. Like
Yeah,
literally, it was wild. Things have kind of settled in that space when it comes to raw materials. Now, labor has gone. I mean, it's gone through the roof.
sure.
The labor that we're paying on jobs now is just astronomical, but the good contractors know, like, they can basically name a price.
Yeah.
you know
Without a doubt.
so
We're coming to the close. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. A little rapid
yep,
fire.
sure.
Somebody said, what makes a good rental property?
What makes a good rental property? For me, an area that will have high demand and you can get a good renter. Properties that are in obviously good condition. You got to take the neighborhood into consideration as well. Is the block, does it look well kept, right? Or does it have a rundown house next to it? Everyone's going to have different opinions. They're going to have different strategies. Some people like to do Section 8. Some people like to do short-term rentals. Some people like to do long-term rentals like us. um, you know, for us, we're just looking for that passive income. And we want to, you know, have those properties for our retirement. So
Yeah.
they don't really need to make a ton of money right now for us, because our active real estate sales business and our active flip business, that's what keeps us, you know, turning along. But, you know, having, you know, in 10 years from now, you know, having 15 properties that I've got, you know, maybe 30% loan to value on, you know, would be awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm not looking
And
to have 100. I'm not looking to have 100 properties.
you're not?
No, no,
Okay.
no. There's a great book out there I just read, called, The Small and Mighty Investor. It's by Chad Carson. Um, I struggle with this. I struggle with this mightily. Um, you know, I've read, 10x is, easier than
Mhm.
2x by Dr. Ben Hardy, and
Which
that
is
talks
an amazing book.
amazing book, and it talks about just going, you know, just going balls to the wall all the way, right? And then I followed that up with The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor by Chad Carson, and like in the first chapter, he says, uh, "What's enough? When's enough enough? Right? When's enough enough?" You know, so I don't know. This is something I grapple with mightily, because we all, you know, especially in the KW ecosystem, we, you know, we talk about failing forward and setting ginormous goals, because even if you fail at hitting the goal, like how much more did you do than you wouldn't have done had you not made that goal, right? So it's something that I struggle with mightily, and I'm sure we all do on this call.
Yeah. Um, Last thing, if you could summarize just super quickly, if
Yeah.
somebody's ready to pull the Band-Aid and want to do their first BRRRR, what would you tell them?
Um, I would tell them to do it. I would tell them to do it. There's no better teacher than learning,
Mm,
than doing. There's no better teacher than doing, right? So you're not going to know what it's going to cost you to get an entire house painted until you have an entire house painted. It's not going to, you're not going to know what it's going to cost you to renovate a bathroom until you've renovated a bathroom. Now, I can certainly give you some guardrails, right? Um, you know, for a basic bathroom in a Akron or Cleveland bungalow that's 6 feet by 8 feet, for me to gut that bathroom and put it back together, you're going to spend about $4,000, you know,
mm,
to put decent finishes in it. You know, and you're going to, so labor and material, you're going to be four to $5,000, right? To put a decent kitchen together, a 10 by 10 kitchen, you know, completely gutted, new cabinets, new countertop, new everything, you know, you're going to be somewhere, you know, $6,000 to $8,000, right? You're going to be $2,000 for appliances. You know, a furnace is going to cost you $3,000 to $4,000. You know, you'll learn these things as you go along. But for those who are kind of on the fence, I would just tell them to go. Just
yep.
tell them to go.
And I love it goes back to what you said. There's no better teacher than doing. Just do it. Even if you make mistakes, that's how you
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
even
mean, at the end of the day, even if you break even on the deal, you break even, the education was worth it.
Mhm,
So,
without a doubt. Mike, thank you so much. And again,
sure.
if you're on the chat, scroll up to the very top. Diana shared your podcast. It is like a must listen to. It's
Right.
great. It's to the point. I think it's so applicable for
Thank you.
people. Mike, would you be open to putting your info in the chat if anybody
Sure.
wants to reach out?
Yeah. 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 No,
Thank
I don't
you.
mind.
He's like, thanks a lot, Jill.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Email would be best. Email would be
Okay.
best. Let me
It's
throw this in
Michael at the
here.
Magno Group.
Yep. Yep. Michael.
Is that weird? I have it memorized.
It's all good.
Magnogroup.com. Thank you
Yep.
so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Yeah.
rest of your day, and we appreciate you, Mike.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.